الذي خلق الدنيا فجعلها دار فناء وزوال متصرفة بأهلها حالا بعد حال، فالمغرور من غرته والشقي من فتنته. وصلى الله على سيدنا وحبيبنا وعلى سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي أمير المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. Allah says in His holy book, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, ذلك ومن يعظم شعائر الله فإنها من تقوى القلوب. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, that and whoever venerates the sacraments of Allah, indeed that arises from the God-weariness of the hearts. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. We begin this night, this eve of tragedy, by passing our condolences first and foremost to the Imam of our time, to the 12th Holy Imam, as he is the first of the individuals to grieve on such an eve, on such a night. And he is the one that's most impacted by the memory of this great tragedy. So we start by passing our condolences to him, to our respected scholars, to our high maraja, to all of the believers, and especially those that helped in establishing this blessed gathering. On such an eve, we begin the commemorations and the remembrance of the tragedy of Ashura, the tragedy that took place on the 10th of Muharram in the year 61 after Hijrah. And if you know anything about the lunar calendar, you know that the year starts with the month of Muharram. And so tomorrow, inshallah, will be the first of Muharram of the year 1445. That means this tragedy took place 1,384 years ago. And so many people, especially non-Shia, and maybe even some Shia, will ask, why is it that you commemorate a tragedy that took place over 1,000 years ago, over 1,300 years ago? Why is it that you still remember that? Hasn't it been such a long time? Hasn't time allowed you to forget? Isn't it wrong to remember and weep for a tragedy that took place so many years ago in such a faraway land to only a small group of people, about 100 people? And they try to minimize that tragedy. But inshallah, in these nights, we attempt to answer these questions. Why is it that we commemorate this event? Why do we keep on commemorating it? We've been commemorating it as Shia for over 1,300 years. And inshallah, we will keep on commemorating it. Why do we commemorate it? Why is it that this event happened in the land of Karbala? What was Imam Hussein doing in Karbala in the first place? What were the rest of Ahlul Bayt doing? What were the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, Imam Ali, Imam al-Hassan, doing before that led to this tragedy, that foreshadowed and forewarned of this tragedy? What did the Imams of Ahlul Bayt do after it? And what are the practical lessons that we can draw from this tragedy? Was Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam really defeated in that battle, or was he triumphant? And if he was triumphant in some way, what was the success and the achievement that he was able to pursue through that tragedy? Inshallah, we will attempt to answer these questions over the course of these 10 nights. But before we begin, I'd like to, first of all, remind everyone that, inshallah, any comments, questions, feedback that you might have for me, I would love to listen to, because as I'm, inshallah, hoping to provide some benefit to this audience, I also want to benefit from you guys as well. So any feedback, any comments are more than appreciated. Now, in the course of these 10 nights, again, we will tackle these questions, and the answers that I'll be presenting will be taken from a number of sources from some of our respected scholars. First and foremost being the book of Faji'at al-Taf by the late Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim, also drawing some inspiration from the book of the late Ayatollah Sheikh Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin, Hussein's Revolution, Thawrat al-Hussein, some of the works of Sayyid Ali Mahdi al-Hakim, and other esteemed scholars that I've had the opportunity to learn from as well. And so it's important for me to mention these sources because, again, I seek to pass on some benefit to the audience here, and if it's not taken from a well-known and legitimate source, then the benefit will not be achieved. And so to give that benefit, I want to make sure that you know what my sources are and where this information is being taken from. So let's begin with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam reached the land of Karbala on the 7th of Muharram after a trip through the lands from Medina to Mecca towards Kufa, eventually ending up in Karbala due to the circumstances that we'll be speaking about inshallah in the coming nights. But all of these events that led to Imam al-Hussein arriving in Karbala were driven by choices that the Imam made. The Imam was making choices all along the way and even before he set out from Medina. And so why did the Imam choose to leave Medina to set out towards Mecca and then to set out towards Kufa and to end up in that situation and in that circumstance? What were the choices that drove Imam al-Hussein towards that eventual tragedy? If we look at history and historical accounts, we find that one of the direct reasons for the Imam to leave his homeland in the city of Medina, the home of his grandfather, where he grew up, where he was born and where he grew up, one of the main reasons is that he was receiving letters from the city of Kufa. The Kufans, the Shia there, and others were writing to Imam al-Hussein telling him, come to Kufa. We are here as an army for you. We will support you. We will have your back. And we will help you in leading a reformation against the Bani Umayyah who were corrupting the Muslim nation and the religion of Islam. And so Imam al-Hussein would get letter after letter pledging support for a movement of reformation. So the Imam saw that there were many supporters available in Kufa for him to go there. Now, the availability of supporters for a movement of reform is one of the conditions that the Imams make as a condition for their choices. We see that all the Imams look at that as one of the preconditions before embarking on such a journey. For example, we look at Imam Ali Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, and we see that after the era of the three Khulafa, when the third Khalifa Uthman was assassinated, when people came to Imam Ali and asked him to take the reins of the Khilafah, what was his response? What were the conditions that led him to analyze and assess the choice and say, yes, I will take the Khilafah? He says, أما والذي فلق الحب وبرأ النسمة لولا حضور الحاضر وقيام الحجة بوجود الناصر وما أخذ الله على العلماء أن لا يقاروا على كظة ظالم ولا سغب مظلوم. And he continues. He says, if it wasn't for people, if they had not come to me as supporters, and if supporters hadn't exhausted the argument, if I hadn't had so many supporters in this endeavor, I wouldn't have embarked on it. I wouldn't have taken the Khilafah. In fact, he characterizes the Khilafah and he says it's so worthless to him personally, and he characterizes it, he says, as worthless as the spit of a goat. So long as, he says in Arabic, so long as the only reason I would care for it is because it would give me the opportunity to enjoin good and forbid evil. أأمر بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر. And so the Imam went through that assessment and he found an opportunity to do Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy an Munkar. He found enough supporters for him to mobilize, and so he mobilized and he took the Khilafah. And he became the fourth political Khalifa. Of course, we understand and we know that he is our first Imam, but politically he became the fourth Khalifa in that passing of history. So Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam went through a similar analysis. He got these letters from Kufa that said, yes, we are supporters for you and we will support you in this endeavor. And so he made that choice. He left Medina. He set out towards Kufa to start his movement of reformation. Now, a person might ask, if Imam al-Hussein's choices were the ones that led to this tragedy, could we say that this tragedy was just a culmination of human choices? Of choices that the Imam made and choices that Yazid made, choices that Bani Umayyah made, that all resulted in a tragic event. It was just maybe wrong choices by Bani Umayyah, misassessment maybe. What happened that led to this tragedy? And if we look at our traditions and our historical accounts, we find it to be the opposite. In fact, if we look at the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt from Hussein, Imam al-Hassan, Imam Ali, the Holy Prophet, we find that all of what happened up to the tragedy of Karbala was all drawn up by a divine plan that led to that massacre. It wasn't just Imam al-Hussein making his choices, but he was making those choices and decisions based on a divine plan that was drawn for him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, given to the Holy Prophet, passed down to Imam Ali and Imam al-Hassan, and then to Imam al-Hussein. How do we know that? We see from traditions that since the birth of Imam al-Hussein, the Holy Prophet would foretell of the massacre that would happen in Karbala. So there are some traditions that say on the day that the Imam was born, the Holy Prophet would weep and would tell Lady Fatima and Imam Ali of the events that would happen in Karbala, of the tragedy that would happen in Karbala. And then further, as Imam al-Hussein was growing up, traditions tell us that the Prophet used to take Imam al-Hussein and kiss him on his neck. And he would say, I kiss him on his neck because that's how he will be slaughtered in the land of Karbala. One tradition tells us that the angel Jibra'il came to the Holy Prophet and gave him a handful of sand. And he said, this is the sand from the land of Karbala. The Prophet took that sand and he gave it to one of his wives, Salama, and he told her, on the day that Imam al-Hussein will be murdered, that sand will turn blood red. And so from the times of the Holy Prophet, there were foretellings. He was prophesying the massacre that would happen in Karbala. Not just any massacre, but with details, including the detail of where it would happen, having that handful of sand from that specific land of where the Imam would meet that tragedy. And then it would move on, and Imam Ali alayhi salam would make similar foretellings. Imam al-Hassan would make similar foretellings. In fact, Imam al-Hassan, even on his deathbed, would turn to his brother Imam al-Hussein and say, La yawmaka yawmika ya Aba Abdullah. There is no day like your day, O Hussein. With all the tragedies that we've witnessed together as brothers, the passing of the Holy Prophet, the martyrdom of Lady Fatima, the martyrdom of Imam Ali, all of those were great tragedies. But the great day, the one day that is not equaled, is your day, O Aba Abdullah. So that was foretelling of the massacre and how it would happen and the achievements that it would reach. And even Imam al-Hussein himself, during his life and through his journey, he was always foretelling of what would happen to him in the end and the massacre that he would face. And so before leaving Medina, he would speak to his half-brother, Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah, and he would tell him, I saw my grandfather in a vision. He said, O Hussein, set out on your journey, for God has surely willed to see you as a martyr. And of course, Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah had grown up in those environments, and he had seen and he had heard the prophecies and the foretelling of Imam al-Hussein being massacred in that way. But he was confused. He asked, then why do you take the women and the children with you? Why do you take the women? The Imam replied, the Prophet told me, God has surely willed to see them as captives. And so the details, even the detail of where the land is, the land of Karbala, the tragedies that would happen, the capture of the women, all of those details were foretold by the Holy Prophet and by the Imams as part of that divine plan that was set in place for them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is why the Imam, before he left Medina, he wrote to the Bani Hashim, he said, إِنَّ مَنْ لَحِقَ بِيَ اسْتُشْهِدْ وَمَنْ لَمْ يَلْحَقْ بِي لَمْ يُدْرِكِ الْفَاتِحِ. Whoever follows me will be martyred, but whoever does not follow me will not witness the triumph. And so despite this foretelling and knowing of the great tragedy that will take place, there was a triumph that Imam al-Hussein was trying to reach. A triumph that was promised for him through this divine plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this continued to be emphasized even by the Imams after the tragedy of Karbala. It's narrated that someone came up to Imam al-Baqir and asked him, why is it that your forefathers went on these battles that ended in military defeat? The Imam alayhi salam said, God the Almighty had destined that for them. He had declared it and made it a certain reality. It was through prior knowledge given to them by the Messenger of God that they rose for battle. And it is by such knowledge that we did not. So it's not just about Imam al-Hussein carrying out this plan, but also about the other Imams and their roles in it. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam leading up to that tragedy, Imam Ali alayhi salam, and the Imams afterwards, Imam Sajjad, Imam al-Baqir, and how they would carry on that legacy. Of course, as Shia, we do believe in this divine plan, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala drew this all out for the Imams to follow, because they are immaculate Imams, ma'soomeen, that are inspired and given knowledge through the Holy Prophet of these future events. And they are given that choice, and they always make the right choice in those circumstances. As the Holy Prophet ﷺ says, describing his grandsons, Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein, he says, Al-Hasan wal-Hussein imamani qama aw qa'ada. Hasan and Hussein are Imams, whether they stand or sit, whether they rise for battle or settle for peace. And so whether it was an Imam al-Hasan rising for battle against Muawiyah, he was an Imam. When he settled for peace with Muawiyah, he was an Imam. When Imam al-Hussein was peaceful with Muawiyah, he was an Imam. And when he rose against Yazid, he was an Imam. And so all of those choices are done by and taken by our Imams, and we need to understand them through the lens of immaculacy, of isma. Now, what does that mean? As an aside, we as Shia Muslims, we believe in the idea of free will. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, put us on this earth, gave us trials and tribulations and tested us, and in all of that, He gave us free will. He gave us the power to choose, moral agency, the ability to tell right from wrong and to make decisions, either right or wrong, the ability to see halal and haram and to choose, inshallah, the halal, the ability to see the wajib and the opportunity to forsake it, and inshallah choosing to fulfill your obligations and your duties in the wajib. So we have free choice as individuals, as human beings, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted us with. And that's why we have moral agency. That's why we are held responsible for our actions on this earth. In the same way, our Imams also have moral agency. They also have free will. Even though they are ma'soomeen by choice. They are immaculate by choice. They are given situations, circumstances where, ma'adallah, they might have an opportunity to sin, or they have the ability to sin. But in their strength of will, in their strength of conviction, strength of faith, they always decide and make the right choice, and they choose the right path. And that's why they are immaculate, they are ma'soomeen. And so, the Imam alayhi salam and Imam al-Hussein, first and foremost, and of course all the rest of our Imams, they chose to implement this divine plan. They chose to implement it despite all the warnings, all the foretellings, all the prophecies of this great massacre that would take place. Why? Because that was Allah's plan for them. That was what was dictated for them. And as Imam Hussein would say on the battlefield of Karbala, if that pleases Allah, then He should take as He pleases. And it's ultimately to reach His pleasure. And that way, we see that our Imams and Imam al-Hussein are the perfect examples of the core concepts of Islam, the core beliefs of Islam, the idea of Tawheed. And Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam standing in the most heart-wrenching of situations, having seen what happened to his friends, to his family, to his infant son, and then turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and saying, Allahumma in kana hadha yurdik fakhud hatta tarda. Allah, if this pleases you, then take until you're fully pleased. And so, through that, the Imams abide by Allah's plan, and they exemplify the greatest choices and the greatest characteristics and personalities in the history of this world. Now, this entire plan culminated in this, what Imam Hussein alayhi salam called Fath, this triumph. What was this triumph that the Imam achieved? Why was this whole plan laid out in this way? Why was it that the Imam had to go through this massacre? And if we look at the words of our Imams and the course of history and the analysis of our scholars, we find that to summarize the achievements of our Imams, the achievement of the massacre of Karbala, it is that it safeguarded the religion of Islam. And that's only a summary. To summarize it in one line, the Imam alayhi salam safeguarded Islam by safeguarding the Holy Quran and by providing a spirit and a passion for the Shia to carry this forward. Inshallah, we have the rest of these nights to go and unpack this statement and see why it's true and how it's true and how it actually is practical to our everyday lives. And through that, we will shed some light on the history of the Imam and Imam Hussein first and foremost, also Imam Ali and Imam al-Hassan, and the idea of Imamah in general. For tonight, let's take a step back and let's try to understand practically what this means for us. How can we take this understanding of Imam al-Hussein's decision making and apply it practically in our everyday lives? Now, we look at Imam al-Hussein, we see that he made all these choices, and we see that he always made the right choice, we said. He is ma'soom, he is immaculate, and he was able to make the right choice in every circumstance. So let's look at ourselves and assess our personal decision-making process. How is it that we make decisions in our lives? And now, when I say make decisions, usually most of us are thinking about, okay, do I pursue this career or that? Do I pursue a career in medicine or a career in business or in law? Do I marry this person? Do I buy this house? These are some consequential choices that we make during our lives. But it's also important to understand that our choices are much more than that. It's much more than a few important seminal choices that we make in our lives. We're actually faced with choice in everything that we do. When I woke up this morning, I had a choice of whether I have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. When I came here, I had a choice of when to leave my house. I had a choice of where to prepare this lecture, at home or at the office. And so these might seem like small choices, small decisions to be made, but they're still choices nonetheless. And so how do we make choices when we're confronted with these decision points? What do we do? Whether big or small, how do we analyze and how do we come to make a choice about each of those things? So let's say, for example, I have a choice to make of should I go out of state to attend a prestigious university. How do I make that choice? Do I just look at the prestige that comes with that name? Do I look at the career potentials that come with it? Do I look at just my personal feeling of wanting to get away from home and experience something new? Are those the only things that I assess in my decision-making process? When it comes to marriage, if I want to pursue marriage with a potential spouse, do I look only for looks and profession and degree, or do I look beyond that? Where does religion play a role in my decision-making process? When I'm looking at these university choices of potentially going out of state to attend school, do I look and see, okay, how will this affect me personally in my spirituality, and my closeness to the faith, and my ability to practice? When I'm looking for a spouse, do I assess, okay, is this a person that's going to help me grow as a Muslim? Is this a person who's going to help me raise a good Muslim family? Are these assessments coming into our minds when we are making these choices? Or are we keeping it at the superficial level of the profession, the degree, the income, the house, the car? And it's important for us to move past that and into assessing how these choices affect our faith personally. Because we shouldn't just look at Islam as a religion of do's and don'ts. It's not just about halal and haram. Of course, those have an important role to play in our religion. They set the boundaries, the lines that we cannot cross. But aside from that, we should adopt our religion as the foundation of everything that we do. We should adopt our religion as the basis for all of these decisions that we make, all of our decision making. When we come to a decision, we should make these decisions based on values and principles that we take from the Holy Quran, from the Sunnah of the Prophet, from the traditions of Ahlul Bayt. Again, and I don't mean just the big choices that we're faced with, but even the small choices. When I take out my phone, do I spend 15 minutes scrolling through Instagram? Or do I pick it up and call a friend, call a family member, check up on my parents? How do I make those decisions of what to do in that specific circumstance? In all of that, we seek to make our decisions based on values and principles that we take from the Holy Quran and from our religion. So let's look to the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم. O you who believe, obey Allah, obey the Prophet, and those vested with authority amongst you. So we're ordered to obey Allah. His commandments are in the Holy Quran. We're ordered to obey the Prophet. His commandments are in the Sunnah. We are ordered to obey the Imams, and that is found in their traditions. Okay, so those are the broad outlines of what we can and can't do, the do's and don'ts, the lines that we should not cross. Those are the commandments that Allah says obey. What else? Is there a level more than obedience? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, you have in the Holy Prophet a great example. In another verse, Allah tells the Prophet, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهِ. Say, if you love Allah, then follow me and Allah will love you. And so we're ordered to follow the Prophet and take him as an example. Not just obey his commands, but follow the example that he and his family set for us. And again, the best examples that we can see are in the Ahlul Bayt, the Immaculate Imams, and the decisions that they made throughout their lives. Again, this sounds general. So how is it that I can practically find the values and principles of the Quran of the Ahlul Bayt so that I can apply them in my daily life? One might say, pick up the Quran, read it, and you'll understand those values and principles. And while picking up the Quran and reading it is great in and of itself, and it's something that we should all do or aspire to do, it's not necessarily enough. Not everyone understands the Arabic language, not everyone can read the Quran, and even if you have some form of Arabic fluency, not everyone can understand the depths of meaning in the Quran. Imam Ali alayhi salam describes the Quran and he says about the Quran, حَمَّالٌ ذُو وُجُوهٍ. It has depth and layers. So not everyone can just understand the Quran. So we have to go back to those who can understand it in its full detail. And who are those? Those are the Holy Prophet and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. So we look to their Sunnah and their traditions. So now, let's go and look for those books and read those traditions. But again, we fall into a similar problem. We have those traditions, they're in Arabic, they have a certain, maybe a dialect to them, a certain culture surrounding them, certain circumstances. We might not be able to understand the full depth of a hadith. When Imam al-Sadiq says, for example, he says one thing, we don't understand exactly who he's speaking to, who the individuals around him are, what the general atmosphere was, what were the general opinions outside the schools of Ahlul Bayt. And so, to be able to really understand the depths of the values and principles of the Ahlul Bayt and the Holy Quran, a person might need to dedicate their lives to specialize in these disciplines, the discipline of Quran and sciences, of tafsir, of hadith, of fiqh, of usul. But not everyone can dedicate their lives to that specialization. We have a few individuals, not a handful of individuals, but we have a class of individuals that attend these seminaries and dedicate their lives to understanding and perfecting those disciplines. And so for us who aren't able to necessarily dedicate to that in our lives, to become ourselves scholars in that sense, then we have no recourse other than looking to our esteemed scholars, our respected scholars, and taking that wisdom from them, taking that understanding, that analysis of the Holy Quran, of the history, of the traditions, to see what the stances and the values and principles of the Ahlul Bayt were and how we can apply it practically in our lives. And that's why it was important for me to list the sources that I used in these presentations. Because again, I'm not bringing this out of nowhere. I'm relying on a heritage and a tradition and expertise that was put in place to analyze all of this wealth, all of this heritage that the Imams left us with. So, it's important for us to go back to our maraja, to our scholars, understand the broad outlines of our faith, the do's and don'ts, the red lines that we should not cross through the fiqh manuals, as well as understand the spirit of the religion, the principles and the values that we can find in books. For example, the book that I mentioned, Faji'at al-Taf by the late Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Sa'id al-Hakim, to understand what happened in Karbala, how the events led to that, and how it progressed thereafter. All of this is for one purpose: for us to perfect ourselves, our decision-making practices, to be individuals that, insha'Allah, please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We follow these role models so that, insha'Allah, we can stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we say, these are the individuals that you chose for us. We did our best to take them as examples, to have them as our role models, to make choices in the way that they taught us to do. And this is what we achieved. And inshallah, we will able through that on the Day of Judgment to find our place in paradise along their side. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And that applies again not just to Imam al-Hussein, but to all of our Imams. As we said, the Holy Prophet said of Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein, Al-Hasan wal-Hussein imamani qama aw qa'ada. So whether they rose, whether they sat, they were Imams. And that is the case for Imams after Imam al-Sajjad, Imam al-Baqir, up to our 12th Holy Imam. Whether he is present amongst us, whether he is in occultation, he continues to be our Imam. And we should seek to gain that connection with him that we're trying to do in these nights. We commemorate in these nights because we are remembering not just this tragedy, but we know that there's someone that remembers it with us. There's the grandson of Imam al-Hussein who is the first to weep, the first to grieve, the first to remember this tragedy. This is our Imam. And so we stand alongside him by remembering the events and the tragedies that took place on his family, weeping alongside him. Commemorating Imam al-Hussein alongside our Imam, our living Imam of this time. So the Imams, alayhim salam, after the events of Karbala, continued to remember and taught their followers to remember and commemorate the event of Muharram and the event of Ashura. Again, we go back and we ask why. And we go back and we look at Imam al-Hussein. If we ask him, why is it that you set out towards Karbala? And we find that he tells us in his words. He says, إني لم أخرج أشرا ولا بطرا ولا مفسدا ولا ظالما وإنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي رسول الله أريد أن أأمر بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر. I did not set out of discontent, nor out of arrogance, nor as a corrupter, nor as an oppressor. Instead, I set out to seek reform in the nation of my grandfather. I wish to command what is good and forbid what is evil. And so, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, the whole purpose of him setting out and facing that tragedy that he knew was coming was that so he can provide this guidance, this amr bil ma'ruf nahy anil munkar, this command for good that generations to come will take forward, will listen to his words, to his call, and implement that reform within themselves. And so by commemorating, by coming to these gatherings, we are giving life to these words of Imam al-Hussein. We are giving life to the reformation that Imam al-Hussein wanted of us, of all Muslims. So we go back and we address that initial question that we posed. Why is it that we remember and commemorate and cry for Imam al-Hussein? And it comes down to three things: the what, the who, and the why. The what might be obvious. There was a grand tragedy that took place in the land of Karbala, from the companions of Imam al-Hussein, starting with Al-Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi, to Habib bin Mudahir, to all of the other companions, each of which made his stance and was massacred on that land, to the family of the beloved Imam, Ali al-Akbar, al-Abbas, Abu Fadl al-Abbas, to al-Imam's nephews, his children, up to the infant Radi', and then to Imam al-Hussein himself. And so, if we look at what was preserved for us from the traditions of Ahlul Bayt, we find some of the most vivid descriptions of some heinous crimes that took place on that land. And if it was for nothing else, we should commemorate and we should weep for the inhumanity that took place on that land, for the crimes that took place in that land on that day. But what makes the tragedy 1,000 times greater is the who. Who did it take place against? Who did those crimes take place against? It was none other than the family of the Holy Prophet, of the greatest creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of our beloved Prophet, the Prophet of Islam, the Messenger of God. His grandson, it was his grandson that was shamelessly massacred on that land, alongside his family, alongside his children, his nephews. It was his women that were widowed, his children that were orphaned. It wasn't just a massacre that happened to anybody, but it was a massacre that happened to the holiest person alive on earth at that time. The individual connected directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our means, our wasila to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the means of intercession, the means of hidayah, the means of guidance. That was the individual that was on that land. And if those crimes weren't enough, understanding who they happened to is what drives us to commemorate and to remember that tragedy. But what takes it another step further is the why. Why was it that Imam al-Hussein was present in that land and went through that sacrifice and that tragedy? And again, in his own words, he did it for the sake of reformation. In his own words, he did it in that most heartbreaking circumstance. He says, Allahumma in kana hadha yurdik fakhudh hatta tarda. If this is what pleases you, then take until you are fully pleased. It's understanding the why of why Imam Hussein did this, to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost, but also to reform the nation of Islam, so that we as Muslimin in this day and age, 1,384 years after, can look for this religion and understand its true teachings as they were taught by the Holy Prophet, as they were taught by the Holy Quran, and to implement them in our lives. And so each single one of us should be grateful to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, because without his sacrifice, we wouldn't be here today as Muslimin. We wouldn't be Muslims practicing our faith as taught to us by our Prophet. And so, on these nights, we remember our beloved Imam al-Hussein. We remember, of course, the truth that is our Holy Prophet. We remember the virtue of Imam Ali. We remember the purity of Lady Zahra. And we mourn them. We mourn them as the Imams taught us. And so, one of the beautiful ways in which they taught us to mourn is one supplication that we were taught to mourn our Imams as well as the occultation of our 12th Holy Imam. It's called Dua al-Nudba. And in that dua, the Imam teaches us to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask. We say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ayn al-Hasan, Ayn al-Hussein, أين أبناء الحسين? Where is Hassan? Where is Hussein? Where are the children of Hussein? What happened to them? What were the events? What were the tragedies? What were the events that took place, the crimes that took place against these individuals? صالح بعد صالح وصادق بعد صادق. A virtuous person after another, a truthful person after another were massacred and martyred, continuing through the rest of our imams. أين السبيل بعد السبيل؟ أين الخيارة بعد الخيارة? Where is the path after the path? Where is the chosen one after the chosen one? أين الشموس الطالعة؟ أين الأقمار المنيرة؟ أين الأنجم الزاهرة? Where are the rising suns? Where are the shining moons? Where are the brilliant stars? Where are they? Where are our imams? How can we get closer to them? Where are we? What is our distance from them right now? Can we get closer to our imams, to Imam Hassan, to Imam Hussein, to Imam Ali, through these gatherings? And then the dua continues and teaches us to say, أين جامع الكلمة على التقوى؟ أين باب الله الذي منه يؤتى? Where is the one who will unite all under the word of piety? Where is the gate of God through whom he is reached? Where is our beloved 12th Holy Imam? How can we seek a greater connection with him عليه السلام? We ask, أين الطالب بدخول الأنبياء وأبناء الأنبياء؟ أين الطالب بدم المقتول بكربلاء? Where is the one seeking retribution for the prophets and the sons of prophets? Where is the one seeking retribution for the ones killed in the land of Karbala? Where is our 12th Holy Imam? Where are we in our distance from him? On such a night, we pass our condolences to our 12th Holy Imam, to our respected scholars, to our high maraja, to all the believers, especially those who helped establish this blessed gathering. هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
Thank you, Hajj Ahsantum. Thank you for coming tonight. Inshallah, for today, this is it. Tomorrow we'll start at 6:30 again, inshallah. Some nights, inshallah, we'll have Hajj Mohammad Ali Banoon. Some nights we'll have Sayyid Haidar Bahr al-Ulum. On the 10th onwards, we'll have Sheikh Hamam, inshallah. Again, thank you for coming tonight. See you tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.